I've got with me today Doug Williams. Doug pastors the Emmanuel Community Church International in Walthamstow, in inner city setting in East London. And I've known Doug for over 20 years, actually. Before I was the pastor, he used to come and visit in my father-in-law's time. And Doug has a fantastic background story, which we may not get into today, but he's got an amazing background story. Pastors a fantastic, diverse church. And we've journeyed together for many years. And he's been up in our place, as I'm sure many of you will know and remember, and has always deposited and left a fantastic investment into the life of our church. Doug's church is multinational also. And I thought it would be, in the light of some of the calamitous circumstances and situation we find ourselves in, with some of the difficulties that we have at the moment, I thought it would be great to have a conversation with somebody who I know is going to bring not only just experience, but fantastic insight and wisdom for us that we can gain from, I think, individually, but also corporately as a church too. And so it's my privilege, I think, and pleasure to have
thank you,
a conversation with us today. And we'll see how it goes.
We'll see how it goes.
And we'll see how it goes. We'll see how the conversation goes. It would be great, Doug. I think, obviously, since the last time you're with us at a lead night, there'll be a lot of people in the life of the church that wouldn't know you. So it'd be really fantastic just to give a little bit of background and a sense of why I've decided that you're the best voice to speak to. I think it'd be great. Just your experience and background would be enough in itself to say, yeah, this guy knows what he's on.
Well, I mean, in terms of my background, my father's from Sierra Leone with his parentage, mixture of Jamaican and Sierra Leone, born in the UK, where I was born. My mother's from Nigeria. Okay. And so, with their marital problems in the early part of my life, like from 3 months old, I was in foster care and children's home and stayed in care until I was 18. So I never was raised with my dad went through his own kids. And I was fostered out into a white family in the Medway area in the UK. And I stayed with that family for a good year. I mean, it was a fantastic time. That lady, as a white lady, did everything she could to make the children her care, especially the children of color, really, really welcome. And I think that put a real love in my heart for people of every color.
Yes.
I mean, without even a conversation with her as a foster mother, she saved me from any involvement in radical black politics when growing up, because to be absorbed into radical black politics, I'd have to be saying all white people are racist. I couldn't trust them. They don't have an affirmation of your life. They don't try and help you in any way. I couldn't say that about her. To me, she was the real Queen of England, and even to the point where she had tension with her own family, who thought that maybe preferential treatment should be given to her biological grandchildren rather than these children of color that she had in care. And she refused to do that, and said she would be prepared for her own children and grandchildren not to come to her home if they felt that she had a bias. She treated everybody the same, and she was going to continue to do that, whoever liked it. And I remember as a young kid listening through the crack of a door one day at a very difficult conversation she was having with one of her daughters about how grandchildren should be given a little bit more treatment, a family treatment, and these kids who you're taking in. And she said, no, they're all the same to me. I love them all, and they love me. So
that's incredibly powerful.
It made me go, wow. I mean, just never, I couldn't get that out of my heart, and I can't. Now, the other is coming up after I went to live for a while, and then to another set of parents. And while I was in the children's home, like most of the schools as a kid I went to, I was the only black face, which had its advantages and disadvantages. The advantage was that if they needed somebody to play one of the three wise men in the Christmas pageant or a nativity story, I normally got a spot. So I was like, I'm a star for at least one day a year, because they needed some black face from one of these wise men from the East. And so I got that. But I mean, there was always the challenge of being that minority face, and people wanted to be ugly and call you ugly names. And so I did fight a lot. I carried a knife in my teens because I'd been attacked one day, and I was going to make sure. And I have no joy in saying that I've had to use that a couple of times to defend myself, or just to create problems. I got a bit of an attitude and stuff, and that was an ugly season for my life. And then you fight through all of that. You try and deal with understandings of that, and I didn't fully understand some things until I left that area, came to London, and then I had my first encounter with the police in Soho. Getting dragged out into the high street in Wembley and searched unfair. When my car being stopped numerous times, and me getting out and having to breathalyze, and I'm going, well, why am I being stopped? Just we're doing our job, son. I mean, they're calling me son. They're my age, and I'm like, what is this? Yeah. So I'm just being very careful not to get provoked into an attitudinal posture of heart that's going to create conflict and difficulty.
Yes.
But that was, so I've come through all of those things, but I think I've come through with a kind of place of balance to go, wow, people, it's people's people. Do you know what I mean? And our hearts are all kinds of, we're all a mixture of sunshine and shade, whatever your ethnic heritage is. And so, I don't put everything down to one person's pigmentation of skin. It's the attitude of the heart. However, with the whole issue that we're now in with Black Lives Matter, people say, what do you feel about this movement? I've gone, well, as a movement, if you're asking me about the movement, I have cautions with that because it holds certain ideologies that my theology can't embrace. It has some strange ideas about sexuality, about family. Yes. You just go to their website, Black Lives Matter, and there's stuff there that you go, well, why would this point on the agenda be anything to do with blackness? I don't get where this is coming from. There's a liberal agenda that's found its way in there and is somehow using the footprint and profile of the black justice concern to profile itself. And I'm a little concerned about where that's all going. So I want critical distance from a political movement. The concept of Black Lives Matter and the issue of justice that's been brought to the table with the murder of George Floyd, and the other stories in America. Well, I'm absolutely 100%, wanting justice because if they're sustained for black people, it actually threatens justice for all people. Yeah. And so I think you've got to be able to say on the justice issue, how can I remain silent? But I just want to be sure that that's not perceived as me embracing everything in the official Black Lives Matter
I understand.
agenda.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. And I think, obviously, with the Black Lives Matter sentiment and focus, I guess, that is obviously partly why we're having this conversation, because it's brought up into sharp focus, I guess, issues that have been simmering for years and years and decades and decades. And I mean, you've alluded to one or two of your own personal illustrations.
Oh, yeah,
Are you able to help us, Doug, as to why you think injustice in our nation, I appreciate we're perhaps different from the US, but why injustice in our nation has been the way it has been? I mean, how come you have experienced what you've experienced, and how is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, the point I was saying is that we obviously are focused now in some educational context with Black History Month. But I'm saying we probably wouldn't require a Black History Month if we had a very robust White History Month, because the story of Black people is actually in that. Yes. And so I think some of the angst is that story has not been fully realized. And I find this is going to be quite an uncomfortable season of dialogue, especially for white people who, through no fault of their own, I think have been given a little bit of a miseducation. Story, for example, statue pulled down in Bristol. Yes. When they actually hear that this man trafficked 84,000 Black Africans into the Caribbean, what are the statistics? 12,000 of them were children. 19,000 of them got tossed overboard because they were sick or too old, and maybe would have been part of his profit margin if they arrived in the UK or beyond or in the Caribbean. They would have done well. Or a person whose statue could have underneath it, he's a man of wisdom and virtue. Because, like I said, a mixture of sunshine and shade. You've got to be balanced about what he did, because we've got to learn lessons to say we're not going to follow the shade in his history. Yeah. And so when a local authority there's tried to be dialogue between them and local people for many, many years, but that story's not being heard. or their angst or concern is not really being properly addressed.
Yeah.
That's where some of this underlying problem has come from. And I think, with Floyd's death and other stories that are emerging, we're now going, okay, we have to talk. We need to get to the table. And so here's the difficulty for white people. They're going, number one, we haven't heard this stuff. Is it made up? How real is this? The truth is, it's all hidden in the archives of your academic learning. If you ask professors and people in college, you go, well, let's look at the history of slavery. Let's look at what happened with the colonial track record, which was, at points degenerated into wholesale international looting of other people's countries.
That's it.
You go, well, what happened with all that? The honesty in that, we've got to know what really happened. And so that's a shock for white people. The other thing is what that did for some of the white cultures who were involved in it. They accrued resources that gave them a little bit of a leg up in terms of their own industrial development and stuff. That was all fueled by resources that in some cases were literally stolen from other people. So when you tell that story, it's uncomfortable to hear. And I, as a black guy, have sometimes heard as saying to the contemporary people I'm explaining it to, as if like it's your fault. And the people who I'm across the table from, or in the canteen with, or on the bus with, I'm saying, you did this. And I'm not saying that. So all I'm saying is that there's an advantage. So, let's go to the definition of white privilege. I'm not saying every white person became incredibly rich as a result of the colonial history. I'm saying...
I was just saying, Doug, you broke up there just at the most important, I think, one of the most important elements of where we need to get to, because I appreciate the history that you're presenting and the injustice that history actually then brought about. But I think you're also correct in this whole notion of it's all your fault, and that sense of feeling in our present world, in our present situation, guilty for that which is, as it were, the sins of
you can't. And
so I think that getting to that place of clarity of what it actually means then for us, as it were, to be living in this place of white privilege. I wouldn't mind you going back and describing that sort of definition again, because I think that would be really helpful for us.
What I'm saying is the structural benefit that happened to white culture as a result of being fueled by the resources that it got through its colonial track record, that's given white culture some level of lift up and head start and pushed it forward. So that's what black people are saying. We're not saying every white person became affluent and powerful as a result of that, because some white families suffered. I mean, just study, life in the UK, and you've got your upstairs, downstairs stories of white people who were in the sweatshops like everybody else and had problems and some incredible poverty. Look at the story of what happened in East London, slumming and the difficulties that people went through. It was incredible. So I'm not saying everybody who was white had some kind of economic benefit from it. I'm just saying that the structure as a whole did. And so when black people say, look, that's what white privilege has done, you've got head start on us, and that head start, the resources that were taken and nicked from other people. That's a true story. That's not made up. So number one, I didn't make up the story. Indeed. Number two, I'm not blaming you personally for the story. I'm just saying that's the historical record. So once we look at that and acknowledge that, we now say, well, listen, if that's what happened historically, we must be intentional about never letting that happen again. But if you can't get to tell a story, that's my problem, because now people go, well, I don't feel I've been given the affirmation or the opportunity or the scope of development that some people have simply on the basis of my color. Well, that's something that we really need to change.
And so you've got this, you're almost describing this sort of interregnum in between, where you've got the almost the establishing of the systems based upon history, and then the current notion of lack of fairness and justice again, and this large bit in between where our institutions and our systems have almost been fueled by what we have in history that have now shaped where we're at currently.
Right, and that's the story that's got to be told, because
and are you able to describe a little bit more, perhaps even how that has affected you or people that you know, that institutional aspect that perhaps many people don't get a sense of, in the fact that there are systems in place that make it disadvantageous for those.
Somehow their understanding of where black people fit in that is that we found you chasing down bush meat in the jungle with the blood. So if you've got any benefit to your life as a black person, you owe that to us. And we're going, well, actually, the resources that were in our country, you owe that to us.
Yeah.
So there should have been mutual exchange. When we met one another back in our colonial history, you should have brought some of your learning, your development. We could have brought ours too, because I mean, listen, Africa had its pyramids. You can't build a pyramid if you're a dunce. So we had some education and stuff that was learned by the Greek people as well. There were people in Europe who came to Africa to be educated. So when, please don't think that everybody living in the jungle is the only picture of African history. You need to know how they built and what they built and how things worked. And so there's lots of learning there that can be exchanged. And yeah, if you've got skills to bring with you from your side of the world, let's come. There should have been a mutuality about it, but it wasn't handled fairly. And so when you try and present that to people today, they feel a little bit, defensive about it. And also they misunderstand the term racism, because in some people's mind, being a racist is to engage in personal acts of unkindness to somebody on the basis of their color or culture. And then they go, well, I've never done that. I can't be a racist. I've not said anything or hurt anybody just because they're black or brown. Yes. That's not me. Without understanding this backdrop. And so I think, you get pushback because they've never heard the history, and you get pushback because they feel the definition of racism in their mind says, I have to personally hate you because you're a person of color. That's not what's being said here. It's just the disadvantage that's happened and has been sustained.
Yes.
So you don't get the opportunity. Some people haven't had opportunities for education and economic development.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to. I was looking for you to describe a little bit more in detail. I think, Doug, just it's difficult. We've spoken already before, and I've said to you how difficult it is to, as it were, enter into the experience on the other side of the disadvantage, on the other side of the injustice. And to know what that has looked like and meant for your family, a lot of the people in your world.
Well, when I was working as a pastor in South London, we looked at the demographics of the area where I was living around Peckham. There's a place called North Peckham Estate. And as we were looking at where people lived and what were, as I said, the demographics of the region, I was shocked that so many African families were on that estate, so many black families of color. And I went, how does that happen? How could they couldn't get properties more widespread in this area? They all seem to have been corralled into this zone. And you think, oh, that's a bit of a problem. But how did that happen? Who made those decisions about that? Because then alongside that, there's an economic spin too. And banks, financial institutions were told they shouldn't do redlining. And redlining was when they would look at a particular area and, kind of metaphorically put a red line around it and go, you can't lend those people money. They're, a liability, And so there's no economic uplift for those people. And you think, wow, I'm actually being herded into something that's going to hurt me long term. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
And so those are the kind of things that are hurtful. I mean, I spoke to a young person recently too. There was some recommendations from a school for universities and academic. Well, I asked him, well, how come I'm not, people like me are not being recommended? He goes, well, I mean, I don't think, you'll be able to do it. She said, well, look at my grades. And he went, oh, well, read them to me then. What's your averages? And she wrote read to him a whole list of things that she does. Yes. And he went, well, no, actually, with that sort of background, you should qualify for a recommendation. But I mean, I probably overlooked you because of, how you look, I guess. And she said, what do you mean by that? And it's that kind of thing. Wow. It's very subtle. So she was going, so my education could be hindered because the person who has to make a recommendation is going, she's a black person, she probably hasn't got the capability for doing that. She's going, even if you get underneath the hood stuff, I'm as capable as anybody. So it's those kind of perceptions that create a problem for me.
And I think, you're describing things on a macro level, like the housing and the banking and the job opportunities. But all of them surely, or I need you to help me here, in terms of coming down to the interpersonal stuff. And you've said it quite rightly that there'll be, obviously, I would think the majority of people on this side of the injustice wall, they would say, actually, I've never expressed anything overtly. I've never done anything up front that would have been proactive.
No, exactly. And so
but help us, or help me, Doug, with the obviously there must be some, I don't know, is it mindset issues, or is it an attitudinal element that shapes the injustice that is being actually then?
I do. I
from the micro to the macro, I guess I'm trying to get at.
I mean, I think there is. I think there are certain shifts and certain. I mean, I used to be around all kinds of groups and Christian groups too. And people who know me have said some strange things like, well, you know, I mean, Doug's my friend. I don't see Doug as black. And I'm like, but, or they've said things like, you know, made a joke about being a chocolate drop, or, you know, suntanning. I'm nearly as brown as you today. And they make humorous jokes. And I'm thinking, what is funny about that? Yeah. What is humorous about? I don't even think to make a joke about somebody's color. So why did you make a joke about mine? It never enters my head to say it. Yeah. And so it's those sort of things that you think, so why would that be funny? What are we laughing at here? There isn't anything intrinsically humorous about skin tone, so why are you chuckling? And it's that kind of thing where people go, I never thought about that. And so you're right, it's a mindset that needs to be looked at, because very subtly, almost through a process of osmosis, it's very subliminal, you get the picture that, you know, black people are thugs. If you see a black person in a suit, probably a defendant. You know, if you, I mean, I've walked past people on the tube and seen ladies literally clutch their handbags a bit tighter because a black guy stood next to them. I'm like, I'm not about to mug you, but there's this perception. Yes. So we're all learning how to come to terms with that. You can flip that, Iain, from white to black, because there were black people I know who see a white person and can never see anything right with white. Yes. So there's a black prejudice that we've got to deal with. Yeah. And I'm saying to black people equally, you do have that problem. If you got thinking that all white people are racists and are out to hurt you, then you have no idea how many white faces were in the struggle to, you know, demolish slavery. Yeah. Or who stood out in the streets and said, we don't agree with apartheid. There were white faces involved in those struggles. In the Confederate and Northern tensions in America, the whole Civil War, because the South said, we want to have slaves. And people in the North said, well, that's just wrong, righteously. You know, we can't live like that. Yes. There were white people in that struggle. Indeed. So we've got to be balanced at all of this, and balance in the mindsets. You know, I've got friends who, like, for example, we were out on holiday one day, and as a white family that we know, pastor from another church, and we met on the beach, me and my family and his family. So we all spent a couple of days together. It was a really good time. And in one of the occasions, my youngest son went missing on the beach. I mean, there were just hundreds of kids, and people were like, oh my gosh. We were up and down the beach. Yeah. And in fact, this pastor, a white guy, and his wife, she got so upset. She said, what are we going to do? What's happened to him? I hope nobody's taken him. What's going on? Anyway, we found some police officers. They were, okay, we're going to help you guys look for this little boy. They were looking. We were all up and I don't know how long we were. And eventually the police officer said, look, is there anything else you can tell us about this kid that we've been looking for ages? And so the lady said, yeah, well, he's only small and he's a little black boy. The police officer went, he's black. Well, why didn't you tell us from the beginning? She said, I never thought to say. So bless her heart. It wasn't an issue for her. So if you came to her and said to her, you could be influenced by a structural benefit, she wouldn't get it at all. Yeah, indeed. She'll be heartbroken. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? So it's I totally do. Conversation.
Yeah, I totally do, because that balance is now really very difficult. It's a very difficult tension, because if you comment that you actually don't see people through the eyes of the color of their skin, that now has the potential of being misinterpreted as you're not interested and you're not caring enough. And
but that doesn't, and that's unfair, because I think that part is unfair on white people. They haven't been given the opportunity to get inside what happens to a black person simply on the basis of the skin. I mean, when I'm walking down the street and those police officers smash me against the wall, start searching me, I'm like, what's going on? Or six officers rush into my house. Yes. I just open the door for a conversation on the doorstep. They kick the door in, rush in with two detectives. I'm like, what is going on up in here? When I then go to church and go, man, this is incredible. And the person sitting next to me goes, what's up with you today? It's hard for them to weep with those who are weeping. If I can't tell you honestly, this happened to me for one reason, the color of my skin. And they would have to go, oh, it's never happened to me. Like, I don't, oh, wow, sorry, I didn't know that. And so that's all I want people to get. I want people to get that this is happening. I'm not blaming you for it. I'm just saying it happens.
Yes. And I've appreciated you painting the story of, you know, what has happened to you personally, how a little bit of the why behind that from our history and where we've arrived at in our kind of almost biased thinking. And then I understand the bit of the tension that we're walking. But of course, you and I are both have the privilege of serving international communities from a variety of different nations and endeavoring to, as it were, bring kingdom culture, or at least communicate kingdom culture down into the community of which we are part, and both rejoicing in the fact that all nations are there. And all of a sudden, it's become this a little bit more tense environment than it was for all the reasons that you're describing and the emergence of the injustice. I would love you to tell us, Doug, you've been around a lot, both in terms of denominations, churches, but also for a long time. And I would love you to give us some help and wisdom and insight into some of the things you've seen that have actually demonstrated what the Bible says and what God says about this issue, and kingdom expression of this issue, and how do we manage then the systems of this world in which we live that are sinful and full of bias?
Okay.
How can we be cities on a hill and lights in this challenging environment?
Well, I mean, number one, we can't not engage with the political debate. So when people say, okay, right now on the table is the whole Black Lives Matter thing, should I use that phrase? Should I get involved? Well, as a concept, absolutely, you have to get involved, whether you're black or white. You have to say something. Silence is not an option on this one. However, like I said, I want critical distance from aspects of the Black Lives Matter as a movement that theologically I couldn't affirm, in issues to do with sexuality and understanding of how the human family works, some very strange things. So I want to be able to have my political contribution framed by a theological premise. I've got to have a kingdom mindset. And the kingdom mindset, as far as, you know, the Apostle John looking across heaven and seeing every nation, tribe, and tongue. How do you do that? So obviously he is God saying, John, have a look at what heaven's like. And this is what I like. People from every culture, every ethnicity, every background worshiping God. And I think when people see that, maybe even in our churches, if they walked in on a Sunday and really saw that's how human life could be lived, they'd go, this is a little bit of heaven right here. And so that's what we're going for. But we've got to do that from a theological point of view. My problem, especially when people are in pain, and this is where the danger is for black people, they will lose an objectivity. Pain can rob you of objectivity. But let me give you an illustration. If somebody, I'm in a crowded tube or bus, and somebody bustles and bumps into me, I go, wow, that hit me. You hit me in the arm. You hit me in the chest. What do you think you're doing, man? You know, are you crazy? Can't you see? And I get upset. And the person goes, well, you know, I can't explain. No, I mean, how dare you? And then you've got people on the other side going, yeah, how dare they? You know, and you get really riled up. The person goes, look, if we just dial it down for a second, the guy behind me pushed me. And you go, somebody behind you? What do you mean behind you? Oh, sorry. See, my pain robbed me of perspective.
The full story.
Exactly. And so when black people go, oh, I'm angry, right? I'm going, okay, let's just be sure we know what we're saying and how we're saying it. So we want to get involved in the process, but we've got to be careful that we don't let pain rob us of perspective.
That's very
I'm
powerful.
not coming out into the debate on black justice blaming every white person in the current debate and conversation for being personally responsible for the atrocities of history or the contemporary atrocities. I'm just saying that can we have an honest debate about it? Because from my point of view, all lives matter.
Yes.
Especially black. At this moment, the focus is on black people, but all lives matter. And that's a kingdom perspective because of the redemptive purposes of God in
Very
Christ.
Yeah.
I've got to be able to say that that's my heart. You know, some of my friends have actually lost perspective on that and almost they're just blasting out at white people because they're in pain. And I'm saying that pain's robbed you of objectivity. So when I get a pastor call me and say, look, I'm sitting with my elders and they are angry about the death of George Floyd, and I'm going, well, everybody should be in terms of justice. But he goes, no, they're just angry at white people and they're elders. And we want a multicultural church. What happens if there's problems in our congregation and people are feeling angst and tense? How can my leaders now give a balanced way of handling stuff if they themselves have not got a clear perspective? I went, well, that's where the leaders need to be educated. We come into Christ. We still have our spirits are born again and renewed, reconnected to God. We need a renewal of our mind.
Very good.
And you've got to have your thinking about people completely rinsed of the bias or the pain that's in there. And theology can help you do that.
That's very good.
So we've got to have a theological premise. And then we've got a right to say to the culture, here's an alternative point of view for how human life can be done. We don't want to jeopardize our prophetic opportunity here.
Yeah. Can you unpack that a little bit more, Doug? Because I hear people around talking about. I don't want to belittle it by tokenism, but having this kind of representation here and representation there.
Yeah,
to me, it's a much deeper issue than that. But I would love you to unpack a little bit more of what your thoughts are with regards to this whole issue of the prophetic statement.
Yeah, I don't want people to hear this issue or me raising this issue as me trying to induce white guilt. I don't need another apology. I don't need another round of, look, I'm really sorry for what my great grandparents did. I'm not sure that that's helpful. I just want you to acknowledge that this is the reality of history. And now we're going to have a discussion about the best future we can plan together for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. That's what we're at. We want an agenda for change. And all parties need to be around the table. And they need to be around the table as equals.
Very good.
Where everybody can tell their story and are allowed to exhale. We're not going to get defensive. We're not going to get belligerent with each other. We're just trying to get to the facts. During this conversation, the facts are really your friend.
Yes.
And once the facts are on the table, we go, okay, so how do we frame this for going forward? And what's the theology that helps us handle these facts well? So, they can be quite incendiary. And I don't want you to pull a detonator or a hand grenade simply because you don't have a theology that enables you to handle a tough moment well. So we've got to get back and say, okay, it's all about the issues of the heart. And we in church mustn't fool ourselves and think, well, if we just make sure there's enough black faces in our publicity, we've got white people, black people on the stage when they're leading worship, we get into this affirmative action stuff. Look, black people are not saying, give me the opportunity to do stuff just because I'm black. Give me economic upliftment just because I'm black. You give me it on the basis of what's just and fair for everybody. So if I'm giving a fair opportunity and I have the skills and the capacity like anybody else, I should be given a fair assessment of those skills and abilities in order for any job or opportunity that's being afforded. That's all. It's about fairness for me. And so I'm very keen for that to be a part of the story. The other thing is, we mustn't deceive ourselves in church that we're a multicultural church just because we have a multicolor service. Multicolor services are not the same as multicultural churches unless people are doing life together. And sometimes what happens is people go to a multicolored church and enjoy what that is on a Sunday. But when they leave the service, they're more segregated than Jim Crow America. So I want to know just how far multiculturalism goes. I mean, I know people who've left churches because it was a multicultural service or multicolored service, and they feared that the way these young people are becoming so friendly and so integrated in the youth meeting, it might mean they want to be more than friends. They actually want to become fiancés. And so when they become fiancés, they transition into my family. So now my family is going to become multicolor.
Yes.
Now, I don't know. I was ever ready for that. And so people are thinking that kind of stuff. I'm thinking,
Yes.
am I ready? They won't come out and say it because it sounds ugly, so they just feel led to go somewhere else.
Yeah,
But at the end of the day, those are the things that we've got to talk about. How do you have real multiculturalism? Look, Ian, years ago when I worked with the Lewis Palau mission to London. I worked with a guy, American guy called Maurice Sorrello, which was an interesting 2 years. I worked with the Billy Graham stuff. And of course, those big organizations are really keen to find out, how do people get to these meetings? We're not churches, we're not denominations, we're just an individual preacher with our ministry and our board and our publicity. So was it TV? Was it a post around town? How do people come to these meetings? And so I would be involved in follow-up in a number of those situations, looking at the cards that people sent in, because that information is gold to these guys.
Of course.
And the information, 80% of the people, when asked, how did you come to be in this meeting, said, I came through the invitation of a friend.
Yeah.
And I went, wow, 80%. And that wasn't just one organization.
Across the board.
So I went, okay. So if I want a multicultural church, I'm only going to do that by bringing people who are my friends. I'm going to invite them to my church. So if my network of personal friends is monocultural, then I'm only going to bring people to the church who look like me. I've got to be intentional about having friends who are not like me.
That's very
so
good.
I've invited friends to the church. People have seen my friends stand up. Here's an old white couple. Here's a young black couple. Here's a guy from Egypt. Here's somebody from Spain. These are my friends. Hey, friends, my friends are in church. These are my friends. And they genuinely are. There's nothing cosmetic or just made up about this. I'm saying, this is my network of people that I really love being around.
Yes.
And they don't look like me. I love that. And so people have gone, I really like that. It almost gives the church permission to go, that's what we need to do. We need to be able to reach out and have great friendships with all kinds of people, bro. And I think that genuinely, out of my friendship, that I can begin to invite all kinds of people to the church, and it becomes, what it is. And I'd love to see that happen at a personal level.
Yeah, and that's, you're almost presenting the challenge there, because to invite people into your world, something is to happen in your heart and your head, in terms of both you being willing to step out of your comfort zone into somebody else's world and allow them to step into your world. Two worlds of difference.
But I mean, it can happen. I mean, look at your church. The history of the church there in Aberdeen is that it's had mission at its heart. And it's done a lot of, some of the leaders there and the leadership voices have been very keen on encouraging to go different culture. When I travel, that's one of the key reasons why I love to travel. I love going into a fresh culture and saying, how do you do life here? I find it fascinating. Yeah. I absolutely love it.
So I can totally identify with you. And obviously our family has now got a whole bunch of different nationalities as expressions of that culture that we've endeavored to try to give away into our kids. But what would you say to those who find that, even that mentality, difficult, Doug? What's the theology that helps us to outwork that you've just described?
Okay. The theology that helps that is John 3:16. That you worship a God who loves the whole world. Yeah. The whole world. If you can't and if that's how he is, then the book of Ephesians says, imitate him as dear children.
Yes.
Copy him. Try it. Just step out of your comfort zone for a little bit. Go and talk to somebody who's different in the market. Just be intentional about saying, hey, hi, good morning to you, or a shop. How are you? Let me find out. Where are you from? Tell me about it. Now, you might get a little shocked because you got somebody who's of color and go, so what country are you from? And they go, Scotland. I was born here. So be careful how you do this. Yeah. But just try and say, I'd love to find out a little bit about you. Or join one of your church's missions and just go and say, look, I'll do the simplest thing. I'll go there. You'll be thrilled at going into a different culture. You'll feel shocked. It will help you understand what it's like sometimes to be an ethnic minority. Just go somewhere completely different for a summer holiday and spend time talking with this different culture, you'll come back thinking, I really enjoyed that. I'd never seen like that. It's educational, it's broadening. For me, it's exciting. I mean, and there was when I first came to this church in Emmanuel, I got invited to a family for dinner, a guy called Peter Reese and his wife. And they said, look, it's great to have you, Pastor Doug, and your family. Oh, how lovely. Would you like to come to our home? And I said, sure. I'll come by for, I guess, some meat and potatoes and some Yorkshire pudding. I guess that's what we got, So I got to the table. When they got to the table for the food, firstly, the morning we got to church, he goes, are you still okay for the lunch? Yeah. He's wearing an African dashiki shirt, right? I've got the Western suit and tie on because it's cold, man. It's cold. And I'm like, Pete, what are you doing wearing this outfit, man? This is like for summer. This is for Africa. He goes, I know, but I had some African friends who bought it for me. I really love it. So I just wear it all the time. I was like, okay, this guy's different, man. So we get to his house and we're going to have the dinner. He goes, oh, before we start, I'm just going to say grace, but let me just get something. So he rummages around in the cupboard, comes out with this big bottle of hot sauce, a real spicy sauce. And he went, I bet you'll like this. I went, you actually bet right. I love this. I said, I didn't know you would love this. He said, oh, I can't take it. It's too hot for me. Way too hot. I said, so why do you buy it? And he went, no, because when my friends come, I want to make sure that I can accommodate them. He looked at me incredible. And I was taking him. I was like, do you know what? This is a guy trying to say, I want to have an international network of friends. I want to know your story, your life. My kids love that guy.
I can imagine.
And so it's easy to be in a that to me becomes, your service is now more than just a multicolored service. We're doing life together.
Relationships.
And that's what's really key. And that's all I want. So I want an honest discussion about the political stuff. But we're saying, the thing is, in the politics, even if you have that conversation, how will you heal it when it's an issue to do with the heart? And you need the redemptive grace of a God who says, I love all of these nations around my throne. Very good. And if we can't convey that, and if we can't imitate a God who loves that kind of world, we have a problem with our own theology. So our discipleship's deficient here. If we can't do that, if people say, well, I'm struggling with that. Well, that's part of your growth as a believer and as somebody who wants to imitate God. If you want to be a follower of Jesus, he said, follow me. That's how you do it. He makes champions in his story of people of a different culture. So the confusion over the Jew and the Samaritan, here we are. Yes. I mean, he's a champion in the story. And you think, well, that's incredible. It's Jesus trying to tell people this is what it's like. Here's a guy outside Jewish culture, but he's a Samaritan. I've never seen a faith. He's a Roman. I've never
centurion,
seen a faith.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, totally.
Everybody have a look at this guy's faith. Here's this Syrophoenician woman. She just won't give up until her daughter gets delivered. Come on, people. And she's saying, I know even the dog shouldn't really be getting fed. And he uses a little term, looked at me with puppy. She's
That's very good,
Doug, on the table. I'll take a crumb. He's like, this woman is amazing. Did you see this, guys? And he keeps signposting that. And I'm going, he's doing something. He's trying to tell people, you would have written them off. You wouldn't have, when they came back with the guys, the disciples, and they saw him talking to the Samaritan woman, they wondered what he was doing to them. Number one, she's a Samaritan. Number two, she's a female.
Very good.
Like, so he's blowing up all of those misconceptions. And it's just Jesus gently pointing, saying, did you see what I just did there? Do you see what I'm saying? See who I'm? And we've just got to do that. Let's just be intentional about, we want to be intentional.
I really like that.
Broad friendships. Because that's doable. The macro political stuff, we're going to have those conversations. But when I'm down the high street and I just look across and see a different family, or I say hello to somebody at the bus stop, or I'm on the campus and I deliberately go out and sit with somebody in the canteen and go, hi, you're new here. Wait, how are you? It starts there. It's doable. But
I think the sort of the most, well, not the most, but such a valuable statement you've made there. The reality for all of us is that this is going to take intentionality for us to both shine as lights and to emerge out of all of this calamity that we're in better than we entered it. And I think it seems to me, by what you've just described in this last hour's conversation, Doug, it's intentionality at every level. It's intentionality about looking back and getting a better understanding of history. It's intentionality of trying to enter into somebody else's shoes and seeing the impact of injustice on them. It's intentionality of seeing somebody not through the eyes of the color of their skin. It's intentionality of reaching out a hand and being a friend. It's intentionality about interpreting that love of God that we've experienced. That
For us, it's got to be the kingdom issue. It's got to be the redemptive agenda. That's got to be the priority. You've got to seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. That's got to be the premise on which we function. So we're engaging with the current political debate, but we are doing it from a kingdom stance. Otherwise, we're not offering an alternative. We're trying to say, look, actually, if you want to know how humanity, because that's what Christianity is. It's not joining a religious club. Christianity is saying this is what humanity is supposed to look like.
Yeah, very good.
We're a colony of the king. That's really what we're doing. We're saying
human family.
That's what it is. And that's why I don't have discussion about race, because there's only one human race.
Yeah.
There's multiple ethnicities, but there's only one race. And so this is how the human race is supposed to function. And that's what we're saying. And it can only happen now because the hearts have got twisted and broken. And I mean, the issue is there were white people fighting for the demolition of slavery. There were black people in their own cultures who had slaves.
Yes.
In Egypt, Egypt's a part of Africa.
Yeah.
The Jews were slaves.
Yeah.
There's not a white man in that story.
Yeah.
Come on, let's.
Yeah,
so there's got to be balance.
And just as I think, even at the moment, the Scottish and the English have tension between them and have had for centuries. But even town to town, village to village, family to family, it's part of our human brokenness. I think is injustice and bias and prejudice.
And so the black issue is part of a bigger story.
Yes. Yeah.
We're going to go. We'll focus on it because that's where the focus is, and I'm not diminishing it. And we want to focus on it because it's now on the table.
Yeah.
But it also forms part of a bigger story, and we have got to say, well, we're supporting that. We want justice for all people. We want justice at this moment for black people because that's what the story is presenting us with.
Yeah.
However, there's justice issues here. There's justice issues there.
Yes.
There's a broader and bigger picture. So we've got to bring it all together. You've got to have balance here. But like I'm saying, when you're in pain, it's hard to handle perspective.
Yeah, I love that. That's so helpful, actually. And I think, just as we finish, because I appreciate I've taken up a lot of your time, Doug, but it's been so helpful.
I'm fine.
It's been so helpful for us, just to get an external perspective, both on the issues, but also somebody who knows our local church setting and knows the internationalness of our local setting.
Yeah, definitely. I think you guys are in a great position to offer something here. And if you can if you get this right, honestly, people are going to look in and go, this is a little bit of heaven here.
Yeah. That's kind of you to say. One last bit of advice I'd love you to give, which I think is one of the most important bits at the moment to help us emerge out of where we're at, is what can we do to collectively and individually help the pain?
Well, we can listen. I'm happy. I would love to see Christians go to the protests and try and fight without getting embroiled in the politics, saying I'm a flag carrying BLM person, because there's stuff there that I can't support and affirm. But I want my voice to be raised. I want our church to be known as a church that welcomes people of every color, and our members are trying in every possible way to check their own hearts and mindsets.
Yeah.
Have I been influenced by this? Is there a bias in my mind? Is there a prejudice in my heart? As a white person, am I biased because of the background I was born into? As a black person, has something prejudicial got into my heart that I can't even hear a white person speak without thinking you're a racist? I don't need to listen to you. You deserve to give me money in reparations, or let's defund the police. And I'm like, come on, guys, please. Or white people who feel that I'm afraid to say anything now, because I'm going to get shot down. It's difficult. I mean, should I say anything? When I look on the TV and there's black people marching for justice, but they don't seem to be very just if they're looting somebody's shop.
Yeah.
Can I say that? Am I allowed to go, I get your pain, but does your pain justify that kind of behavior? See, it's got to play both ways, and there's got to be a fairness and a balance in the debate and the discussion. I don't want people justifying bad behavior just because they've had historic pain.
Sure.
So we're trying to be balanced. I don't know if that's helpful at all.
It is. It's been an extremely helpful conversation, and I'm grateful for you just being so candid and open and telling us a bit of your own story as well, Doug. It's been really, really helpful.
Okay.
And I'm quite sure in our context here, where we got at least 40-45% of the people that call our place home are not from Scotland, not from the UK. I think it's fabulous. It's an amazing privilege that we have in the northeast corner of Scotland, that's our experience. But I would love the reality that we are a city on a hill that does demonstrate something different, that is actually an expression of the kingdom and is an element of heaven coming down and being on display here on earth. I would love that to be our reality, and just aware that there's been an increased fragility just in these recent months, I guess partly because of COVID, but also partly because of the issues that have been just exploded because of the injustice towards George Floyd and everything that had come off the back of that. So it's an extremely helpful conversation just to stop and help and think and to consider, actually, this is what God says, this is what kingdom thinking is, and how can we just intentionally put that to bear in our lives so that which is in heaven is lived out through us.
Got it, bro. So Iain, thanks for having me today. Have you appreciated seeing my smile on the camera?
Absolutely, and I love the
mixture of brown skin and a white beard.
I love it.
It works together. So, it can work together.
So tell us, were you Balthazar, Caspar, or the other guy?
I don't know, bro. I was just included. That's what it was. I was included.
But you've certainly proved that teacher right to the very start is right, Doug. It proved that you are indeed a wise man. Thank you so much.
It's been lovely being with you, man. Thank you so much.
Loved having you. Thank you, sir. And we'll look forward to hearing you later on in the summertime, huh?
Okay.
Okay. Bless you, Doug.
Take care.